Welcome back. As the Ukraine-Russia war completes 1 year, the war of words between US and Russia have only escalated. President Putin has now vowed to step up the offensive ahead of the first anniversary of the Ukraine-Russia war. Listen in to this special report by Sanjay Suri.
The war in Ukraine is hotting up, and there are signs that this could now spill over well beyond the level that we've seen so far. This is escalating now into a confrontation between the US at the head of NATO on one side and Russia and China on the other. At the moment, that escalation is political and not military in any direct sense, but the political escalation is over a serious war. In a year, we have not seen this level of sharp confrontation build up between the US and China. President Joe Biden is spending a long time now around Ukraine after visiting Ukraine. He gave a firm policy speech in Warsaw where he declared stronger military backing for Ukraine all the way. He's had meetings with NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg, then with the Bucharest 9, which are the NATO member countries on Europe's eastern front facing Russia. This is turning out to be more than some symbolic visit from Biden. This is now about strategic military decisions that NATO is clearly, at the least, making operational preparations for. On the other side, the Chinese have stepped up their rhetoric against the US while engaging simultaneously in military exercises with the Russians. China's foreign policy advisor Wang Yi met with President Putin in Moscow on Wednesday, and now we have louder and louder claims from both countries of a shared worldview and, of course, of a growing trade relationship and strengthening political ties. This now is turning out to be a very tense situation developing. The US says China is preparing to deliver lethal arms to Russia. China denies this. China has said it will offer a political solution to the problem on the anniversary of the invasion on February the 24th. Now, if that is less than full Russian withdrawal from Ukraine, including Crimea, Ukraine will not accept, nor likely will NATO. And full withdrawal is something Putin is unlikely to accept. The war is in Ukraine, but Ukraine could become the theater, perhaps even a launchpad for a great deal more.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is all set to make his first visit to India on the 25th of February. He will hold bilateral discussions with Prime Minister Modi on boosting the trade and economic partnership between the two countries. Ahead of the visit, I caught up with the German ambassador to India, Philipp Ackermann, and asked him about how the Ukraine war will figure in the discussions.
The geopolitics will figure high on the agenda between the Prime Minister and Chancellor Scholz on Saturday when he will visit Delhi. We are, of course, devastated by the fact that this war is going on for a year now, and as you rightly say, no end in sight. We are decided to support the Ukrainian side as much as we can in order not to let happen what we see from the Russian side, namely a land grab in Ukraine. We feel that in the international context, safety of borders are a very, very important part of our international order, and that should be sustained and that should be prevailing. And therefore, I think our clear decision is to support Ukraine. Now, you've seen that President Biden was in Kiev yesterday, and I think that sends out a very strong signal that the West is united when it comes to support of Ukraine. Russia has to leave Ukraine. Ukraine must get its territorial integrity back, and we will help it to do so.
Right. Do you think decoupling from Russia is permanent? And how will countries in Europe, especially Germany, increase their own military preparedness in the years to come?
So first of all, decoupling is always a very difficult phrase. Russia is a neighbor of Europe, and eventually we'll have to find ways and means to deal with Russia. But now, right now, seeing the current situation, we will continue to, with our sanctions, with our policy towards Russia, in order to make them understand that this is not an acceptable behavior. You can't just invade a smaller country and take land from a smaller country. It's unacceptable. Now, when it comes to our own military preparedness, you have seen that the Germans have really changed their policy, and will spend an enormous amount of money in order to build up our military. I feel we have to accept or admit then that we were under a certain illusion that wars in Europe would not happen anymore. Unfortunately, the facts are different now, so we have to adapt to the facts.
Right. Now, coming to the agenda, coming to the discussions between Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, what will be the priority of the German delegation?
So I think we have a broad range of items on the agenda, and it is, German-Indian partnership is so differentiated, is so deep-going that it's not only one or two agenda items. But as you rightly say, geopolitics, and that includes also China, will be on the agenda high up. But also, I would say, business will be very important. The Chancellor will be accompanied by a very, very good and very powerful business delegations. 12 CEOs of the top companies in Germany will come. We'll talk about climate change and energy transition, which, as you know, is one of our main areas of cooperation with India. We have this partnership for green and sustainable development with India that will lead to a closer and more intense cooperation between Germany and India on the on the ways how to fight climate change, on the ways how to transition your energy mix and all the consequences. And I think another item that will be high on the agenda is skilled labor migration. Germany, as you know, has concluded with India a migration agreement, and we will sit down with the Prime Minister and his team to discuss on how to improve a sort of a migration from India to Germany in order to fill gaps in our workforce on a very high level.
Right. You mentioned China will figure in the talks. In what context will both leaders discuss China? What are your concerns that you'd like to put on the table?
No, it's not. The discussions have not been taking place, so I think it's very difficult to foresee the way how they discuss. But I think fact is that everybody accepts, that China does play a very strange role to some extent in the region. We feel that we should look at China more carefully. It's clear that Germany and China are very linked when it comes to business, but you might have followed that the German government pursues a policy of diversification when it comes to foreign direct investment, and that also makes us look at India much more or much closer than we used to.
Now, when you speak about your diversification strategy, what kind of investments could be announced during this visit? You said that there is a business delegation of 12 CEOs. Is there a likelihood of some investments being announced during this visit?
I'm pretty sure that we'll have one or the other deal and one or the other plan and one or the other development put on the table, but forgive me for not sharing it with you now. It will be shared in due course during the Chancellor's visit.
On the question of diversification, all companies today, every country is thinking about a China plus one strategy. Will that be a priority to assess how India can be the plus one?
I think we don't think China plus one, we think China plus many. And when you talk to German business in Asia, there are also other countries that are very interesting, like Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia, but there is no doubt that India is the only comparable market to China in the long-term run. So I think India is very high on the agenda when it comes to the diversification.
Right. Now, when it comes to the business and economic agenda, are there any kind of issues, trade or non-tariff barriers that you would like to take up?
So, that everything that goes with commerce and trade is outsourced. It's the EU who does it. It's not the Germans anymore. So we are very, very strong supporters of the FTA. The EU is negotiating with the Indian side. In March, we have the next round. I think we are still far from each other. There must be some rapprochement in a way, and we do hope that the Indian and the European side get together so that we soon can see a very comprehensive FTA, which would help our business enormously in India. And I think once this FTA concluded, you'll see a peak in foreign direct investment from Europe, because it is so favorable to.
Right. My final question, if I were to ask you about some sectors which makes Germany most excited about India, what would those be?
I think IT, very clearly. So what you see is that the German business is very much looking to how to marry, let's say, IT startup digitization with high qualified and sophisticated manufacturing. That's a very, very important area. And then services in general. I think India is more and more a service provider, and that's also very interesting for the German delegation.
That's all we have time for on this special broadcast from Achal and me. Thank you for watching and goodbye.